Let's take a look at the web development workflow. It will help to understand the whole process that we're going through with GitHub and Replit integration. So no matter where you write the code, where you host it, where you store the code, you're going to go through a process of writing it and then pushing it up to some kind of code repository and then hosting it on the web. We will be writing our code on replit.com, and then we will be pushing it up to a code repository on github.com, and then we'll host it on github.io. And when we're done, we'll see this whole thing come together. But for now, this is the path that we're going to follow. And this is the basic path that any developer would follow to write a website. Let's just look at terminology here because you're going to see these terms and it comes together with that workflow. So IDE, that is an acronym for Interactive Development Environment, and it's basically a coding environment. This can be done locally or it can be done online on a cloud-based environment, and Replit is a cloud-based online IDE. Now, GitHub is a cloud-based code storage, management, sharing, and web hosting service. So we are able to work all online in this course that we're working on, and that saves us from having to configure local laptops and desktop computers to do this. Now we can do that. We can configure local desktops, but for this course, we are going to make it so that we can do all of this online. So version control, you hear that term with GitHub, and GitHub provides version control for each repository using branching and merging to allow collaboration, and push-pull to load and retrieve code to and from the repository. So branching is a process where you take your current code, so the code that we could think of as the top of the tree of code that you might be maintaining, and you create a copy of it, and then you can work on that. And being able to do that allows multiple people to work on the same code without interfering with each other. And then when we've got a feature added or page added, they can merge that code back in. So if I look at Hello World here that we create, you can see that in this is my list of branches. I only have one branch. It's the default and it's main. But if I wanted to, I could create other branches and it would copy my code. I could change that code, I could add more code, and then I can merge it back into main. So branching and merging supports collaboration and experimentation. Sometimes it's multiple people. Sometimes I'm the only one working on a particular repository, but I want to go try something entirely different with my code. And so I can create a branch. I can go do that experimentation. If I like it, I can push it to the main branch and then uh, go on from there. If I don't like it, I can just abandon it. Local remote, so you'll hear those terms. So developer maintains local and remote repositories. And that just means that I have a repository, the local one that I'm working on, and you'll see that as the code that we are working on in Replit. That's my local repository. And then the remote repository is the GitHub repository. So it's the place where I push my local repository code when I feel like it's ready to be served up. So changes are synced using push and pull commands. So there is a whole language for the Git. So Git itself is an application, and there's a whole language that you can use that has commands like push and pull. When we're in Replit, there is a user interface that helps us to do the syncing. But you will see that we're using add commit, and those are the same terms used in the Git application. But we'll see that when we change files, we're essentially adding them to our local repository, or we're adding our changes to those files. And essentially we call that they're staged locally. And when we've got them the way we want them, we're ready to push. Before we do that, we commit them. And at the commit step, we provide a little message that explains the changes that we've made for this particular commit. And then once they're committed, then we sync it. And that basically just pushes them up to our remote repository. So when we integrate Replit and GitHub, we're going to be really doing two types of authorization. So first we'll come in and initialize our Git repository. We'll add a remote repository in the settings view, and it will create, because we're going to be coming in with code where there is no repository existing to push to. So it will create a repository based on our account name and the repository name, and it'll get that name automatically for you based on the name of the Replit project. So you'll see that once you go through settings and you tell it to configure this, it will just create this repository out on GitHub, but it will make you authorize that. So it'll go through a step where Replit is requesting that it be able to be installed for GitHub, and then it gets authorization from GitHub to do that. And at that point, we're connected. We would see in Replit that we are connected. And we'd see that because there would be a disconnect option in the connected services for GitHub. The next step is we connect our GitHub account. So at this point, if we tried to just push our code without getting authorized on our account, we would get an error and we would be able to click on something that would take us into GitHub again so that we could authorize the account. So we're doing two things: installing Replit on GitHub, connecting and showing it connected on Replit, and then we are connecting our account so that we are able to be authorized to push code from Replit into GitHub. And just a note here, I use the same email for GitHub account as Replit account. Don't think you need to do that, but it could simplify remembering what you've set up. So this is just a picture showing what you could see, and might be helpful for troubleshooting. So these are the two steps. So connecting to GitHub. So when we connect, we will see that GitHub has a disconnect option. So once we've made the connect, and that's been gone through an authorized step, then we will see that we have the option to disconnect. So disconnecting, if we clicked on that, would take away the connection with GitHub. And the way that you get to this is clicking on your account icon in Replit and selecting account and scrolling down to connected services. And if for instance, if I wanted to connect to Google, I would just click on connect. It would go out, run through an authorization process, and then I would see the word disconnect. Here's what happens on the GitHub side. So GitHub, if I were to click on the profile icon in GitHub and select settings, scroll down, and on the left I will see applications. And in that applications, we'll see something like this, where we have 3 tabs. And the first tab now, because I've connected, shows that Replit is connected. Okay, it's installed. And that happens when we do the connect services. The second tab here shows that we have access. So we grant access to the account, and that's to be able to push the code. So this is kind of just a summary of what will happen when you work through the Replit GitHub integration.